over 60 Christians have been murdered by Muslim Fulani terrorists in what is being called a genocide. Where is the global outrage? Well, Dumasani Washington, an expert on Christian persecution in Africa, joins us now. Dumasani, what can you tell us about this horrific event?
Raj, this seems to be the latest in a string of events that goes back years, but the Fulani, as you said, the Fulani herdsmen, they're often called. They are a kind of a nomadic tribe. They are a herding tribe, predominantly Muslim, not all, but predominantly Muslim. And even as the article points out, it does a really good job in the Christian Post there. The vast majority of them not radicalized, but many of them unfortunately are. And there have been these waves of attack for years. And the attacks have been along the lines of taking land. They're targeting predominantly Christian Nigerians. So they are slaughtering those people. They are doing all kinds of horrible, unspeakable things and then taking that land. And often it is dismissed within the Western media as land disputes, of course, those types of things. But it's really a religious war at its root.
Well, you sent me something that I want to read. Quote, what happened to the Israelis on October 7th, 2023 is happening every week in Africa. Can you explain that?
Well, it's amazing because that quote, and in a long, that quote has been coming both from Africans and Israelis who are aware of their situations, right? So whether it's the Fulani in Nigeria, including the Boko Haram, some of you may remember Boko Haram Bring Back Our Girls, something like 11 years ago when they had abducted nearly 300 girls, Christian girls. That Boko Haram is, again, a jihadist terrorist organization. What we see is that what happened on October the 7th when Hamas invaded Israel, killing some 1,300 or abducting 1,300 Israelis. That happens again every week, whether it's in Nigeria, places like Sudan, places like Algeria. Christians are under persecution today, Raj, like never before since the 2,000-year history of the church. And ground zero for many people is Nigeria.
Okay, so obviously I've known you for a while, Dumasani, and this is something that I personally, I can vouch for. You've been speaking on this a lot, all the time, for more than a decade. But the question is, Dumasani, why does no one care?
It's such a multi-pronged answer, Raj. One of those is that, again, for us in the West, and especially the United States, we're comfortable, right? So media doesn't really discuss those types of things because we can be controversial, a religious war, a jihadist war. You get into the whole area of the kind of leftist Islamophobia. Somehow, if you say that, you're attacking Muslims. And of course, nothing could be further from the truth because, as you know, Raj, when that type of slaughtering happens regionally, Muslims also suffer. Christians, Jews, and other Muslims who are living peaceably, the jihadists don't really care about your religion or about what your espousing is. They're committed to a radicalized or very fundamental interpretation of Islam, which is either you convert or you die or you pay the jizya, which is the tax, right? So that's how they're approaching this. So because that whole topic can be somewhat uncomfortable for many Westerners, we generally leave it alone. And let me say this, even as a Christian pastor, even as you know, Roz, the Christian church often doesn't deal with it. Thank God for the Christian organizations and churches that do, but often because it can be controversial and it doesn't feel, I hate to be kind of warm and fuzzy, let's all kind of come together, they back up on it because you have to really deal with ugly things like mass rape and torture and genocide, and those things are really ugly, and most people, they don't really want to touch it. Unfortunately, our silence is actually fueling more of the genocide that's happening.
Well, Dumasani, let me ask you this question. As someone who is intimately involved with everything that happens in this space of Christian persecution in Africa, obviously this story that we're talking about today is horrific. It's hard to imagine. But can you just maybe, for someone who might be new to the idea that Christians are suffering in Africa, can you maybe give us maybe a couple examples of things that have happened in the past decade or so that most folks just don't know about?
Well, let's go back to the Boko Haram in Nigeria, for example. Over 10 years ago, as well, not just to Bring Back Our Girls, Boko Haram pledged allegiance to Islamic State. Now, I want you to really think about that. They pledged allegiance to ISIS, even though ISIS, whether it's based in Iraq or in Syria, what they're saying is that we are in the same league. We are different teams with different jerseys, but we all play in the same league. And what is that league? It is a jihadist terrorism that seeks to either forcibly convert or kill any religious minority, anyone who doesn't agree with them, and this is at epidemic proportions. It's the same thing as Al-Shabaab in Somalia, which also raids into Kenya, or the Janjaweed, which is in Sudan. These are different names, but it's the same thing that's happening. Hezbollah in Lebanon, Islamic Jihad in Gaza. What we're saying is that what our Israeli brothers and sisters are dealing with almost obviously every day around their borders is happening in various parts of the world, especially in different parts of Africa.
Well, Dumasani, most people know you as Pastor Dumasani. So what can we be doing? How can we be praying? I'm sure my friend who's watching this feels disgusted, horrified, but also kind of helpless. Like what can I do? So finally, Dumasani, if someone's watching this, what can they do?
I'll say briefly two things, Raj. Hebrews chapter 13, verse 3 says that we are to remember those in chains as if bound with them. That's, as a matter of fact, Voice of the Martyrs, that's their proof text, bound with them, that we are to be praying for them fervently and ardently as if they were our own flesh and blood. And that is the body of Christ. So we are connected. So we're supposed to be doing that. And the second thing that I would say to people is that there are wonderful organizations like Voice of the Martyrs, like Christian Persecution. There's an Open Doors, that's a publication, everything. They actually give information about this, but they also give you the opportunity to sow a seed. And that if you want to sow a seed in those types of organizations, that goes to helping the pastors who get displaced and their families. Because if you think about it practically, when a church either loses its pastor because of he's been murdered, and that church has gone underground, they still need help in terms of Bibles, food. I mean, sometimes the persecution, ladies and gentlemen, is them being fired from their jobs because they're Christians. So I would say if they want to go further, inform themselves even more. And then also if they want to go further than that, sow a seed into those organizations because they're doing amazing work. We know as Christians that we are going to be persecuted in that way. The Word of God says that, particularly in the last days. So it's our job to do all that we can to relieve that suffering as much as we possibly can.
Dumasani, Washington, my friend, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you, Raj.
Carissimi fratelli e sorelle, con profondo dolore devo annunciare la morte del nostro Santo Padre Francesco. Alle ore 7:35 di questa mattina, il Vescovo di Roma Francesco è tornato alla casa del Padre. La sua vita tutta intera è stata dedicata al servizio del Signore e della sua Chiesa. Ci ha insegnato a vivere i valori del Vangelo con fedeltà, coraggio e amore universale, in modo particolare a favore dei più poveri ed emarginati. Con immensa gratitudine per il suo esempio di vero discepolo del Signore Gesù, raccomandiamo l'anima del Papa Francesco all'infinito amore misericordioso di Dio uno e trino. Grazie.
Pope Francis was a pope of firsts. He was the first pope to come from Latin America, the first to choose the name St. Francis of Assisi, and he was the first pope to come from the Jesuit order, a Catholic religious group known for its service to the marginalised. When Francis was elected, he was an outsider to Rome, and he quickly shook up the Vatican and church establishment. He was a disruptor who called on the church to return to its core mission, welcoming everyone, serving the poor, embracing humility. Francis himself adopted a simple lifestyle, refusing to live in the papal palace. But what did he actually achieve? Well, Francis issued landmark teachings on protecting the environment and working with other faiths. He was a tireless voice for peace, demanding the end to possession of nuclear weapons and abolishing the death penalty. And looking to the future, he called for a treaty to regulate the development of AI. He also shifted the Church's approach on LGBTQ+ Catholics by offering blessings to same-sex couples. And he appointed women to senior positions in the Vatican. More than anything, however, Francis reformed the papacy. He was a people's pope who shunned the trappings of office and sought to mobilise all Catholics in the Church's mission. Now it is up to the Church's most senior figures, the cardinals, to decide who comes next. One thing is for sure, Francis' successor has big shoes to fill. Well, this was Pope Francis' most high-profile appearance since leaving the hospital. Francis appeared on the balcony at St. Peter's behind me after he had met with Vice President J.D. Vance. They had a brief meeting in the Pope's residence, the Santa Marta. Of course, Vice President Vance is a Catholic. He was received into the Catholic Church in 2019, but he has not been on the same page as Pope Francis when it comes to questions such as migration. The Pope, before his hospitalization, released a stinging rebuke to the Trump administration for their immigration policy. However, the Pope taking the time to meet with Vice President Vance before coming out to St. Peter's. He offered the Easter Sunday blessing, the traditional Urbi et Orbi blessing, which only the Pope can give. He did not read, though, his Easter Sunday address. The Pope, since recovering from double pneumonia, really finds it very difficult to speak for long periods of time, but he was able to wish people in the square a happy Easter.
Hello. So good to see you. Good morning. How are you?
Find yourself.
Yeah, thank you. Happy Easter to you, Father. Wonderful. I know you've not been feeling great, but it's good to see you in better health.
These are for your children.
Okay, thank you.
These are the gifts. These are also gifts for you.
Thank you. It's beautiful.
The Vatican tie, and then the rosaries for your wife, white for your children. Thank you very much for your visit.
Of course. And thank you for seeing me. Pray for you every day. God bless you.
Io prego per lei ogni giorno, che Dio la benedica. Grazie, Santo Padre.
Happy Easter.
Our world is increasingly a place of violent conflict, hatred, and brutal atrocities, committed even in the name of God and of religion. We know that no religion is immune from forms of individual delusion or ideological extremism. There is another temptation which we must especially guard against. The simplistic reductionism which sees only good or evil, or if you will, the righteous and sinners. The contemporary world, with its open wounds, which affect so many of our brothers and sisters, demands that we confront every form of polarization, which would divide it into these two camps.
The one-time bouncer who became Pope, Jorge Bergoglio, was born in Argentina and became the Archbishop of Buenos Aires in 1998. When he became Pope in 2013, he took the name Francis after a saint who championed the poor. The early actions of this new head of the Catholic Church included washing the feet of the elderly and of prisoners. Pope Francis often spoke out about dignity for migrants and refugees, and he cared deeply about the environment, saying climate change was rich countries inflicting damage on poor ones. One of the challenges of his time as Pope was dealing with the sexual abuse of children by priests.
God weeps for the sexual abuse of children.
On a visit to Ireland, he apologised to victims, but more scandals continued to emerge. His time as Pope did mark a change in tone on the subject of homosexuality. Early on, when talking about a gay bishop, he remarked, "Who am I to judge?" But some say in practical terms, on the Vatican stance and on church teachings, there was little change. He had conservative views on abortion, contraception, surrogacy and gender reassignment. Pope Francis leaves behind a much more global church leadership, thanks to his appointment of more than 140 cardinals from non-European countries.
Pope Francis was a pope of firsts. He was the first pope to come from Latin America, the first to choose the name St. Francis of Assisi, and he was the first pope to come from the Jesuit order, a Catholic religious group known for its service to the marginalised. When Francis was elected, he was an outsider to Rome, and he quickly shook up the Vatican and church establishment. He was a disruptor who called on the church to return to its core mission, welcoming everyone, serving the poor, embracing humility. Francis himself adopted a simple lifestyle, refusing to live in the papal palace. But what did he actually achieve? Well, Francis issued landmark teachings on protecting the environment and working with other faiths. He was a tireless voice for peace, demanding the end to possession of nuclear weapons and abolishing the death penalty. And looking to the future, he called for a treaty to regulate the development of AI. He also shifted the church's approach on LGBTQ+ Catholics by offering blessings to same-sex couples. And he appointed women to senior positions in the Vatican. More than anything, however, Francis reformed the papacy. He was a people's pope who shunned the trappings of office and sought to mobilise all Catholics in the church's mission. Now it is up to the church's most senior figures, the cardinals, to decide who comes next. One thing is for sure, Francis' successor has big shoes to fill.
An end of an era. As we move forward to the Pope, I wish Peter would be Gregory. Good luck. Because I know say he go carry for it. I'm waiting for his tweet if he hasn't done that already. But ladies and gentlemen, this is where I draw it. Please like, share, and subscribe as you go out. We'll be back later to talk about the information warfare that is being pushed by Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the UAE. But until then, ladies and gentlemen, peace out.